Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. Now, the problems of Egypt are economic before they're political, because the nature of the political system is largely circumscribed by the economic problems that they have, the lack of development, the poverty, the illiteracy, the very low wages and incomes. You might say that there is a necessary material economic basis for democracy, for human rights, for parliamentary representative government. If you don't have that basic material substratum, you can't have such a government. You can't have flourishing democracy in the midst of terrible want, as Roosevelt says, right? People who are needy are also susceptible to dictatorial government. And therefore, what we're recommending is not the status quo, but rather a very robust economic program. It's very interesting. All of the competing groups that we can see, they basically have nothing to say about economics. They're incapable of identifying a minimum program to guarantee the progress of the country. And this means that they're ignorant of their own history, right? In the 1950s, the big issue was the Aswan High Dam on the Nile. Before the Aswan High Dam, you'd have this yearly Nile flood cycle. You'd have drought sometimes, floods other times. There was no means of flood control, no means of hydroelectric power, no means to fight malaria. So what Nasser wanted to do, and this is Colonel Gamal Abdel Nasser, who came into power in 1952 by overthrowing King Farouk, the monarchy backed by the U.S. And the British, needless to say, very, very corrupt guy, King Farouk. And he came in and he wanted to build the Aswan High Dam. And he went to John Foster Dulles of the United States and said, look, we want this program. Won't you help us build it? And Dulles said no, because, of course, we're colonialist imperialists, and he himself was a former Nazi sympathizer. So instead, Nasser was then able to turn to the Soviets, who said, of course, yes, we will do it. And it was finally an Italian engineering company that built this huge dam, which is the basis of the existence of the entire country today. And such living standards as they have are absolutely dependent on the existence of this Aswan High Dam. And that points us in the right direction. The obvious resources of Egypt are the water of the Nile and the Suez Canal. Now let's look at maybe the Suez Canal first, because it's easier. In the case of the Suez Canal, 8% of world trade currently goes through the Suez Canal, and the Suez Canal, therefore, could be made bigger. It would be more than 8% if you had certain changes made. You could double track it, essentially make it a two-way street instead of a one-way street in certain points. Widen it, make it more able to take the very large super tankers that sometimes now have to go around the Cape of Africa there. So if the U.S. won't do it, well, there's Russia is still there, but above all China. Chinese engineering companies, I think, would be perfectly capable of doing this. So that would be the Suez Canal. And the reason you want to do that is you collect tolls. You get good money by having the ships go through the Suez Canal. The other question then is the Nile. We need the full Tennessee Valley Authority treatment for the Nile. And that means not one dam, but an entire graduated system of flood control, hydroelectric, anti-malaria, and related things with canals for shipping. And then we get to the really big one. The water of the Nile right now is largely wasted because it simply goes into the Mediterranean, and that's the end of it. Look at all that fresh water. Couldn't something be done? Well, the obvious plan is to have a second Nile. Instead of having the Nile, which goes roughly from south to north to meet the Mediterranean there at Alexandria and so forth, let's have a second Nile that goes off just about on a 45-degree angle and goes across that desert and eventually reaches the Mediterranean, but much closer to Libya than to the border with Israel there in the Sinai Peninsula. So way several hundred miles over to the west, you'd have a second Nile. Now the problem with that is the existence of these salt domes. There are salt formations there which if the water touches them, it becomes saline and therefore unusable for agricultural purposes. So there are big engineering problems, but the idea would be, instead of having all that water go down the Nile and out into the Mediterranean, have it go out through a second Nile and then use that for irrigating a large swath of desert. Because I've actually seen this. When you fly from Khartoum to Cairo, you essentially fly down the Nile, and you see Lake Nasser, right? Lake Nasser is the large buildup of water behind the Aswan High Dam. So there's another engineering job. And again, if the Anglo-Americans say no, why not play the Chinese card, play the South Korean card, play some card? There's got to be somebody in the world who's interested in the advantages of having a piece of the Suez Canal, let us say, or joining in the agricultural development of the Egyptian desert, because this can make you, frankly, a lot of money, and it's much more reliable than derivatives, and it's much more likely to be a long-term solution. The other obvious thing is you've got all this youth unemployment. Well, you need a jobs program, and it's got to be done by the government. The private sector has struck out as usual, and under conditions of world economic depression, it's hopeless to expect the private sector to do these things. The one thing you can always do with your in-country resources, using 0% credit from your nationalized central bank, is housing. You can always build very attractive, very good quality modern housing using things that you've already got in your country. And, of course, the Egyptians have an engineering record going back, 6,000, 7,000 years. They'll have no trouble building some very nice apartment houses, some new satellite cities around Cairo, new cities at different points along the Nile. You obviously need a program of scientific development. One of the things you'd want to get into is the question of desalinization of water. You'd need a bunch of nuclear reactors. Mubarak has said he wants to build them, so build them and begin transforming the Mediterranean salt water into fresh water that would be usable for all the things that you want to do. So it would be infrastructure, housing, science, and out of all of that, jobs. You'd obviously need to kick out the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, because they will try to sabotage every form of real economic development that one can imagine. You're also going to have a debt moratorium, that is to say an immediate unlimited freeze in the payment of all interest and principal on international financial debt, to be done immediately. I would also say the following. Given the outrageous, impudent, insolent interference by Obama in the internal affairs of Egypt, it is at the point where a proud country might consider breaking diplomatic relations with the United States, breaking diplomatic relations with the United Kingdom, because they've been just as bad or worse, kicking out their ambassadors, kicking out their embassy staffs, kicking out their CIA and MI6 station chiefs, getting rid of their NGOs, essentially telling these foreigners, we don't need you. Sadat did this to the Soviets back in the 70s. Maybe Mubarak or his successor wants to do it to the Anglo-Americans and get back to a more balanced situation. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio.